I guess you can see the audio works now. So we can continue then. And hello there. Sorry for the inconvenience. I checked the forecast right before it started, and everything seems to be working. And all of a sudden, when I started, it stopped working. As I said, I apologize. I'm just learning how to do live streams. And I welcome everyone. And for start, I'm trying to say a few things about myself and about why I'm doing what I'm doing. And then we're going to talk about Russia and war in Ukraine. I can answer questions if you have any, and if anybody could come in such short notice. Unfortunately, it's very difficult for me to plan ahead events like that. And what I tried, I just advertised on Quora and some other places, and hope that something will happen and some people might be able to come. But if this wouldn't work out, then we will try to schedule next time more precisely. It's just sometimes difficult to decide when I'm gonna be in certain time. The war in Ukraine is going on, and I'm helping Ukraine, and it's very difficult, unfortunately, to plan. I apologize for that. And I want to say that I'm grateful for support of my subscribers on YouTube and on Quora, because it is very important to know that at least something what you're doing is important and it helps some people. I am originally from the USSR and Russia. I'm not from Ukraine. This is I want to underline. And yes, I do have some Ukrainian roots, but it never meant to me anything. I never was pro-Ukrainian or against Ukrainian. Ukraine was a part of the USSR. I didn't interact with Ukraine as an independent country all that much. I have visited Crimea in the past, but I was a child, I was in school, and Ukraine was part of the Ukrainian SSR. Like, it was a part of, it was a republic within the Soviet Union at the time. So I haven't been an independent country of Ukraine yet. I hope maybe someday. But now I have friends, many Russian-speaking authors in Ukraine, and this is how it is. Like, I now have friends all over Ukraine, and I don't need some media to tell me what's happening, because I know what's happening in Energodar, in Kiev, in Kharkov, in Lvov, in Vinnytsia, and Odessa, and many other places, Kramatorsk, a lot of places in Ukraine. I could say that I started to be interested in what happened in Ukraine from the time about Maidan. Some people asked me these questions on Quora, why this time period? Because at the time I was already in Canada for several years, and the shock I experienced from how far the information we had in Russia and USSR about the rest of the world was wrong. How far apart the truth, how it is, which the rest of the world know, and the propaganda we learned in the USSR. This was it was terrible. How different it is. Like, when I came and I find out that practically everything except like math, 2 plus 2 still equals 4 in Canada, as everywhere in the world, and physics, gravity, laws of gravity, I guess, that's about it. The rest of it was a lie. One big lie. The shock I experienced was getting deeper and deeper since I live here more and more, and since I find out that Russia started the war in Ukraine in 2014. I guess that particular war, which I researched very well. Why? Because it was just happening at the time, and I need to know whose fault is this, what is actually happening, why it is happening. So I started to research. I didn't want to believe that my country, Russia, which I'm citizen as well as Canadian, and I'm fighting for both countries, but I wanted to find out, like, for Canada and for Russia. Now I'm fighting for Ukraine as well, because Ukraine doesn't deserve what happened to them. Russia attacked Ukraine. And that's what I find out with my research in 2014. Back then, when I saw and know what was happening after all the investigations in open sources, after all the information I got from people who came here to Canada from these places. I didn't have too many friends at the time, but in Ukraine, but I did learn what was happening because I saw how it was done. I saw how Russia propaganda at the time worked. It was massive astroturfing campaign and propaganda. And this is what I was just astonished to know. I just saw right in front of me in real life how it was done to us in the USSR, how the propaganda was created, how sometimes they completely invent things, sometimes they just using information, they just using little bit of truth, 5%, maybe 10%, and create completely different narrative and different story. So it was shocking. It was so clear how it was done to us, so I hoped to learn and tell it to people so it never happened again. I wrote a book in 2017, it is in Russian, it's under pen name and it's still in internet. I thought maybe Russians would want to know the truth, but no, they thought they already know everything. The brainwashing of a cult that was used in the USSR, that was used in Nazi Germany, that is using Putin right now. He is not a brilliant man in any way, no. He was a mediocre bureaucrat who hardly kept his job in basically in FSB, KGB. He wasn't anybody of importance back then. He was just a paper pusher. So for now, he just using Soviet tactics of propaganda, Soviet tactics of lying and denying. One of the tactics it's like children using in the kindergarten. You a poo-poo head. No, you a poo-poo head. They completely flip 180 degrees whatever happened and blame the other side in everything they have done themselves. That's exactly what USSR did. That's exactly what I experienced. Exactly. That is why I started to research it deeper and deeper. And I researched Maidan. Excuse me. I researched Maidan as well. And I proved to myself what is happening. I was need to know, as a Russian citizen, as well as Canadian, what is happening. Whose fault is this? And I find out it's 100% Russian fault. Nothing Ukraine did or said, nothing anybody did or said could make Putin do what he did. Period. There is no question about it. I just finished one play in playlist. I finished the first episode of the series about the war in Ukraine, and it's called "What Happened to Crimea in 2014." It's 6 videos, 5 videos, and conclusion, which you can go into details and you can find out what actually happened in Ukraine back then. It was done with all the proofs and video proofs and so on, so you can actually know what happened. There is a shorter video as well, which called Who and When Started the War in Ukraine, which you can know in general. The point is that Putin and his supporters, his oligarchs, they did it, they planned it, and the most important part, they planned it ahead. It wasn't something spontaneous, it wasn't something people in Crimea wanted. No. And I proved that as well. So you're welcome to see that. As to Russia, I have lived all over Russia. I have lived in Siberia when my parents was building a railroad there. It was called the Komsomol Construction. Komsomol, it was like Young Communist League. It was our organization. My parents at the time wasn't in the Young Communist League, but it was presented to Russians as a construction of a century, and young people all over the Russia, I mean Soviet Union, not just Russia, was going there to build a railroad. That's where I lived. I lived for many years there. It was absolutely nowhere in the forest. We flew there by helicopter because there was no roads even then. Yet now they build roads, they build cities, they build railroad, and lots of other things. I have lived on the Black Sea coast near Sochi, which was used as a place for Olympic Games and stuff like that. Unfortunately, it's flooding right now very badly. And I experienced flood there too once. It was terrible. Little rivers which chicken can walk through became a huge, like few meters tall pile of water which go in and flooding everything. And I have lived in Volgograd, which used to be Stalingrad and during World War II. And I have friends all over Russia and all over even former Soviet Union. I have friends in Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Ukraine, and several other places. So I just wanted to share that information with everyone because I find out and I proved for myself what is actually happening. What happened in Ukraine back then, what is happening now, and the destruction of Ukraine and Russia is it's awful, especially Ukraine. Russia, well, the economy going down, as I said. I'm an economist myself by profession, and I used to teach in several universities in Russia. When I see what they call economy, the fake pretend thing, which was in USSR as well, which they were pretending they have economy. But it doesn't work like real economy. It's all controlled by the government, and at some point they can't hold it anymore. They just can't. So what is gonna happen? Well, collapse of economy. They right now also already can't pay some government workers. Russian people thinking that best social lift is going to the war in Ukraine. So it is how it is. Unfortunately, it's not going to be good for Russia. Unless they remove Putin from power and started to do actually something. Thank you very much for watching my channel and for your support. Sorry that this broadcast came very unpredictably and not many people can join at the moment. But maybe some people will watch it later and we will see about that. I'll try to next time plan it a little bit better. It is important to share the truth with people because Russia put in a massive effort into covering the truth, distorting the truth, confusing people. That's the main goal of Russian propaganda, is confuse people. Let them believe that nobody knows the truth, that nothing is happening, that nobody actually know what's happening. Yes, they do. And there are facts and there is truth, which is I proved beyond any doubt on my channel, and people who watching me know that. There are video proofs. People could go and argue with Putin, who was saying that, oh, we didn't do anything and it's fault of Ukraine. Now he's saying Ukraine not even a country. Russia signed the Budapest Memorandum with a country of Ukraine. Russia agreed to that. Putin personally agreed to that, and we could see it on video. Internet remembers everything. Some things on my channel I kind of preserving for a future, so it didn't get forgotten or lost. They could say, oh, we didn't say that, oh, we didn't do that. Oh, yes, you did. And we have proofs of that for a future war crime trials or tribunal of some sort and stuff like that. These things need to be preserved. Another thing I did recently, it was about several videos. I probably will put them in a separate playlist. It was about Yevgeny Prigozhin and the Wagner Group and their attempted coup or mutiny in Russia. There would be lots of speculations about this. There is nothing to speculate about. Let's look at the facts. It happened. Prigozhin and his troops basically walked in and get to Moscow. They didn't make it 200 kilometers just to Moscow. And they stopped. Why? Because the mercenaries. They're not doing it because Prigozhin wanted to defend Russian people or defend his soldiers. He was doing it because he was upset. He was upset that he get pushed aside. And it's actually happened in the history before. In Russian history, in Russia-Ukraine war history. I'll tell about it in a minute. If you have any questions, you're welcome to ask at any time and I answer them. But since I don't see questions, that's why I'm keep talking in general. So it was one of the news, and it still continues because lots of speculations. Wagner Group kinda supposed to be in Belarus, but nobody saw them so far much. I seen little bit information that looks like maybe they training somebody in there, but the camps were shown earlier. It seemed like still mostly empty. Prigozhin himself, he wasn't fighting for Russian people. He wasn't fighting for his troops. He just wanted attention. He wanted get back some powers he had. And the recent statement of Putin that, oh, the Wagner doesn't exist. Well, I just showed you on my channel Putin personally admitting the whole Wagner was financed from Russian government. So it was from Russian budget, which we all Russian citizens paid for it. I'm not paying taxes much right now to Russia, and that's on purpose because I don't want my money be used to fight aggressive war in Ukraine. But nevertheless, I am not Putin. I still have property in Russia. I still have bank account in Russia. I can't access it, but I have it. And so my family is living in my apartment and they paying taxes, I hope. Otherwise the government will take my apartment most likely, and I most likely will never see it again. But yeah, it just it's very sad. Whatever Russia doing right now is just extremely sad. And Putin has to be stopped. He's not gonna stop by himself. He had a whole bunch of chances and off-ramps of any kind. If he wanted to stop at any point, he would have. He doesn't want to. And if by any miracle he get Ukraine, he will still continue going into other countries. And they're not even hiding this. They said it's gonna happen. Ukraine need help and support is in any way we can possibly do it. Because Ukraine need ammunition, Ukraine need weapons, and we all supposed to help Ukraine. Why? Because Ukraine is the only thing which standing between us and that Russian dictator who thinking of himself as the world czar, world king, who want to build an empire by attaching more lands to Russia without their consent or agreement of any kind. That is why Putin will not stop. And I wrote the article about that even in the first days of the full-scale invasion. And he still didn't stop. And he won't. He can, but he won't. And he has to be stopped. So far, Ukrainians doing it by enormous sacrifice of themselves. And they will not stop even if nobody would support them, because they don't have any other choice. They either fight or die. And again, I have a video, Putin's original plan exposed, which saying what exactly gonna happen to them if they give up. They're not stupid to do that. And they wouldn't trust Putin in any way. It wouldn't happen. They will just fight into the death. And with Western and our support or without. And yet, support is extremely well going on. Countries support Ukraine. As to the news, there was a summit, NATO summit. I personally didn't expect much from it because we know NATO's rules. They don't accept countries with unresolved territorial conflicts. They just don't. And because otherwise they would have to get into the war right away. And oh, sorry, I just now noticed that there are questions. Do you think Putin will actually declare war so that he can mobilize more men and free up resources? This is my worry right now. Well, he doesn't have to declare war. Mobilization in Russia never stopped. He never signed anything saying that it stopped. He can mobilize people at any moment in time. Nobody's stopping him. That's what I was trying to tell Russians. That the mobilization isn't stopped. It's still going. They can mobilize more people at any moment. They're not safe. Many of them was trying escaped at first, but then it's kind of hard to make a life in some other countries. and they decided they're gonna come back, it was a bad idea to come back. It was a good idea to leave, but it's not a good idea to come back. Because Putin can just grab them next day. He just waiting until they get back home and they get comfortable. He just come knock on the door and take them. He, at this point in Russia, can do whatever he wants. It's like a czar. It's his word. He can give it, he can take it back. He can make one law today and completely opposite law tomorrow. There is no law in Russia. People get grabbed on the streets because they came out with a little sign, even empty paper. It doesn't say anything on it. People can step with a sign no to war, and they could go in jail for 15 years. Putin is torturing Alexei Navalny, Russian opposition leader, in jail for no reason whatsoever, just because he wants to. So FSB doing whatever they like, and Putin officially, even legally, if to talk about law, which doesn't make any sense because there is no law in Russia. But according to the law, Putin was supposed to sign that mobilization stopped and return people from the front because they don't need mobilization anymore. People still in Ukraine fighting, whoever they mobilized in the first place. So there is no need for him to make a special law or anything. He afraid to do that. He doesn't do it not because he can't, because he afraid. He afraid that Russians would wake up finally from their stupor and understand that the war is not going according to the plan. Otherwise, why would you need mobilization? I don't see why they don't see it now, because the first 200,000 Russians who entered Ukraine in February 2022, where they are, they gone. That is why there was need mobilization in the first place. And then they mobilized over 300,000. There are different numbers, how many. They throw them back in. If not count all that Wagner group or those so-called DNR, DPR kind of companies. They throw them in the fire of the war. Nobody counting them, nobody care. Like I just saw the information from Donetsk Republic, so-called. They saying hardly any men of the certain age left. There is no young men left there. They all were mobilized and many of them killed by now. Russians didn't care about them. They used them as a cannon fodder. When they ran away from Liman after Ukrainian first counteroffensive, they just didn't even warn them that they're retreating. They wanted them to stay and cover their back. That's why they didn't bother to inform them that we are going away. We are running. We are retreating. So Putin, these all casualties piling up. Like Russia doesn't count many things as Russian army. They didn't count Wagner as Russian army, which was Russian army. Like recently, just yesterday, the Konashenkov, talking head of Russian military, the only one who allowed to stay in front of a TV screen and saying how much Russia gained in the war, what's happening. He was just came up with a huge list of what Wagner Group returned to Russia, like of weapons. Wagner Group now returning weapons to Russian army, whatever they received. And it's a piles of ammunition, it's Grads, it's a whole bunch of other rocket launchers, what you name it. Like armies in the world doesn't have that kind of stuff. And Wagner does. They all deal with Wagner when Prigozhin was whining about shells and ammunitions. In the very beginning, they get a lot. They get way more than Russian army does. Way, way more. And eventually, after Ukraine get HIMARS and bombed a few ammunition depots, what happened? Wagner started to receive as much as everybody else. That's why he was so complaining. They don't have enough. And more than that, they started to go in roundabout ways, bribing and buying weapons from other parts of Russian army, and some corrupt commanders selling their ammunition to Wagner. So he still was receiving more than Russian army does. And yet, Prigozhin still was complaining, I don't have enough. But now Putin proved the fact that Wagner was Russian army. paid from Russian budget. It is very important to know because Russia hid behind the Wagner's back for years from whatever atrocities they committed in Africa. Nobody seems to care how Russia killing people in Africa, taking people out of jail and make them fight for Wagner, torture, rape, and you name it, whatever war crimes exist in the book, all was committed in Africa by Wagner Group. And Russia said, oh, Wagner isn't Russia, it's not our army. The same thing they pulled out in Crimea in 2014. All those little green men, they are not Russian army. They're not Russian people. Yes, they are. They were. And Putin proved it by saying that he financed Wagner all the time. So Wagner is Russian army. It is Russia. So Russia has to be named as a terrorist state and supporting these terrorists who committed crimes, war crimes, in all kind of parts of the world. Syria, Africa, different countries in Africa. I probably will make a special video about it. And in Ukraine as well, since 2014. My video about Bucha and Slavyansk, proving that there were crime committed in Slavyansk in 2014, before even full-scale invasion, which didn't happen for another 8 years. Before Bucha, before everything, the same thing were happening back then. That's what I was horrified about when I was researching it and I find out how it was. So for now, Putin can do with Russians whatever he wants. He wants to mobilize them, he will. And doesn't need any special laws for any, or excuses or anything. Why he doesn't declare war? I think it because when you declare war on somebody, you're guilty. You started aggressive war, officially. And there are a whole bunch of things going on in United Nations and this and that, and could be a bunch of sanctions triggered. I'm not specialist in this, but every lawyer probably would say how much trouble the country would have who declared the war on somebody. And that is why he keep calling it, even he sometimes himself saying it is a war, but he doesn't go to jail for that. No. He doesn't go to jail for calling a war. Some other people do. And Putin will not declare the war because he doesn't want all that sanctions and everything. So yeah, today I can see, I talked about it a little bit earlier, that Putin said Wagner doesn't exist. What he meant by that, and he's right, officially Wagner does not exist. There is no, by Russian law, mercenaries are forbidden. Period. There is no official paperwork showing who the Wagners are. That is also why Shoigu and Gerasimov and all the army leaders couldn't really give Wagner as much as Putin want them to give. Because how, like being an accountant, imagine somebody coming to your firm, like you doing accounting, and for somebody, and he comes and he just said, oh, I bought a helicopter and I bought a ATV and for my family, my personal needs, but you make it look like it's for the company. How are you gonna do that? But what are you, a magician? A wizard? Simsalabim abracadabra? So is Putin. He strike a deal with Prigozhin, and it's a problem of Shoigu, Gerasimov, or whoever is in charge of the army, make sure that illegal company who doesn't exist by Russian law whatsoever, somehow receiving from Russian army ammunitions, Grad, tanks, BTRs, bullets, machine guns, everything. Like, how are you gonna do it officially? Yet they managed somehow. Putin said only Wagner got $1 billion last year alone. So there is no law. That's why I said there is no law in Russia whatsoever. Wagner not only exists, it conducts a whole bunch of military operations across the globe. Basically, behind them is a Russian army. They are Russian army. They just can't do anything about it. Like, Wagner kinda doesn't exist, but here they are. They almost took Moscow a couple of weeks ago. So legally they don't exist legally on paper, but in real life here they are, and they have troops, plane, trains, automobiles, everything. Not planes, it's just a figure of speech, of course. I hope I answered your question. Next question: does Ukraine need NATO now, or just need enough weapons to finish the job? Well, I didn't expect NATO will accept Ukraine. I also mentioned it earlier. First of all, NATO does not accept countries with unresolved territorial conflicts or a war going on. Because if Ukraine right now join NATO, by Article 5, NATO is supposed to declare war on Russia and go into the war. And Ukraine doesn't ask for it. All Ukraine is asking, give us enough weapons for we can continue, so we can liberate our country, we can finish this war in the right way, which is clearing off all the Ukrainian territories. And it's not because they're greedy or they want territories. Some territories like Crimea, it's economically useless, very much except for tourism. But strategically, even Mr. General Hodges said about that. He has lots of videos about it. Crimea is strategically important to get. Not because politically it will be the end, basically, of Putin. Because it's such a crown jewel in his crown. When Ukraine will rightfully take it back, it will mean Putin lost. And as soon as Ukraine clear up all their territories, for every Russian, it will be obvious. Putin lost. There is no question about it. And highly likely he wouldn't be alive or he would be removed from power. If Putin stay in power, Ukraine is never safe. That's why Ukraine really, really want to join NATO. That's why every other country, like Finland, whoever bordering with Russia, whoever ever dealt with Russia and USSR, like Baltic countries, Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, anybody you can ask from them. Like I have a video on my channel where former Prime Minister of Finland talking, Alexander Stubb, he explained what it's like to live beside Russia. And Russia already attacked Finland. They also made a special military operation on Finland in the past, USSR and Russia. They killed Finnish people. That's why Finland was preparing for the war with Russia for all these years. They never relaxed. And that's why they have a good army. And because they knew Russia gonna attack them again. Everybody knows that. And Ukraine knows that. That is why they need to be in NATO, because this is the only thing which can stop Russia from attacking them again. No matter who will come in power in Russia after Putin, they would know Ukraine is a part of NATO. Do not touch Ukraine. Or you will see the full wrath of the whole alliance. Defensive alliance. I would have laughed out loud if I heard NATO is defensive alliance when I lived in USSR. Because USSR was pumping out propaganda that NATO, oh so scary, oh boy, NATO wanted to attack us, USSR supposed to defend themselves. Many Russians still believe that. I don't, because I live long enough abroad and I have enough information now to confirm it completely. Like, if USSR was so defensive, why in the world they need 30 times amount of nukes to destroy the world, like 30 times, not once, not twice. So here goes in the chimney all the Russia peaceful, guarantor of peace kind of information. We had signs like in the streets in our cities, propaganda signs saying USSR the guarantor of peace. We never want a war. Turned out to be one big lie. And USSR wasn't guarantor of peace. USSR was the reason to NATO to exist in general. And actually NATO was almost getting to dissolve by the 2014, and I also have proofs from NATO on my channel that they really were reducing their forces in Europe, closing military bases, almost no tanks left in Europe at the time. That's why they're having a hard time to bring now weapons to help Ukraine, because they were closing. Russia wasn't a threat anymore. They decided is kind of done, practically, with NATO. If Putin would have done nothing, if he wouldn't have attacked Ukraine and been nice, good neighbor, now nothing would have been left, basically, from NATO. Nobody wanted. Sweden didn't want to join NATO. Finland did. Sweden has to join NATO. And NATO, like Sweden and Finland leaders, made it clear they join in NATO because Putin threatened them. He made them to join NATO. Finland wanted it because they border in Russia and they knew what it's like. Sweden, no. They didn't join NATO before. They didn't even need it. Ukraine even stopped wanting to join NATO for a while. They didn't even want to until Russia attacked them in 2014. That's the only result. And the main proof that Russians don't afraid of NATO, and it's just a pretext. Russia removed the troops from the Russian-Finland border. Finland now part of NATO. It's a huge border. Russia removed the troops and sent them to fight in Ukraine. That's how they so afraid of NATO. It's all a pretext and lie. But Ukraine need to be part of NATO to be able to be defended, ever. They signed Budapest Memorandum, and United States, United Kingdom, and Russia promised that they're gonna defend Ukraine, never attack Ukraine, and nuclear weapons, Ukraine, the third largest in the world stockpile of nuclear weapons, Ukraine give to Russia. But they get promises. Was it fulfilled? No. And now people saying, oh, Budapest Memorandum was just a political declaration. It's not really they give up real nuclear weapons and they receive just blah, blah, blah. But being part of NATO, that would make Ukraine defended. The only thing can make Ukraine feel better and safer is to be part of NATO. So eventually they do need to be part of NATO, but most likely it would be after the war is done. And for now, Ukraine doesn't even ask for it. They just ask for weapons to do it themselves. If they would have it earlier, it would have been done by now. But they didn't. Because apparently some people thinking that there are some defensive weapons and some offensive weapons. All the weapons created as to kill. I might make a video or statement about those cluster ammunition. Many people have questions, but now I have different questions. What is Wagner doing in Belarus? I don't think they are in Belarus. If there are a few people, I do not have any confirmation that they actually are there and how many of them there. All I saw, that's Wagner moving somewhere. Nobody knows where. And there is no any reason to believe that they're gonna attack Kiev from Belarus or anything. There is no confirmation of any of this. I try to give the facts on the channel, whatever I proved. So when it is speculation, I'm just saying it's a speculation. This time, I just watched today as well. I keep an eye on it. I do not have proofs that they are there, at least in a big amounts of any kind. Even the meeting Putin have with the Wagner group, which is also proof that they are part of Russia. They're part of Russian army. Wagner group tried to attack Moscow. They killed people, at least 20 people died. And Putin didn't even show up on the funeral of those pilots killed by Wagner, but he met with Wagners, which is, again, I didn't see video confirmation of that. It confirmed from both sides, include Peskov, Putin's spokesman, that Putin met with Prigozhin and Wagner chief commanders, with 35 people total with Prigozhin. But they decided, talking about their future employment. So these people killed Russian citizens in Russia, threatening the government. Nah, it's okay, it's fine. We'll think about how to give them a better job now. But again, video proofs, I haven't seen video proofs of that. I really surprised that Putin, as afraid as he is, would even sit with them in one room. Being so afraid and paranoid about being assassinated or anything, I really hard time to believe in it, but it confirmed from both sides that it happened. But we don't know what they discussed for sure, how it happened. When Ukraine takes Crimea and Putin's power is subverted, do you think will happen next? That is a very good question. I wish I know. I don't know what's gonna happen. Nobody does. In my opinion, excuse me, what can happen? I think it's one of the necessary steps to happen, because it will prove Russians beyond any doubt if Ukraine will take all their territories, especially Crimea. Why Crimea? As General Hodges said, and he's right, if you look at the map and see Crimea, if Russia will keep staying there, it's like a choking Ukraine. It would be strangling Ukraine. They would just block the Azov Sea and many ports like Berdyansk, Mariupol, Melitopol, everything inside that sea would go through Kerch Strait, and it would be big problem, and Russia will all the time preventing them. So basically, close for Ukraine access from all this side of Ukraine, access to the Black Sea and access to the world. And they could put long range missiles, and they will control basically the whole coast of Black Sea coast, like where Odessa is and so on. So they could threaten and every time pulling that leash on Ukraine. So Crimea is way more important even than Donbass, in opinion of General Hodges and mine. As an economist, I don't really care for Crimea. I've been there. It's a beautiful place. It's great for tourism and everything, but it always in history was how you call it, the region which wasn't economically sufficient. The government of Ukraine was always, and USSR at the time, always was supporting it, always giving it money. They didn't support themselves. They didn't have industries. They didn't have enough to support themselves. But strategically, as you can see, I'm afraid it have to be taken. Even Ukraine might rather do something else, but without it, it will be always controlled by Russia. Russia will always bothering them and always stopping them from doing things. A Russian fleet should be get out of Black Sea, and thanks to stupidity of Putin, Russia will lose access to the sea in many places, except for Russian border, where there is Sochi, there is Novorossiysk. Still, there are ports. There is Tuapse. I live there. It's a beautiful place. Many people think of Russia as a cold country. It's not. The water temperature of water in summer plus 24 Celsius, and it's beautiful place. It's hardly ever snows. It's a palm trees growing there and oranges, mandarins anyways, not as much oranges. Yeah, and some oranges too. But Russia controlling Crimea not only will try to control the coast where the Odessa is, that part, but they will try to control the Azov Sea, and all these cities will just lose access to the Black Sea because Russia will always making problems with them going through the Kerch Strait and stuff. That is why Ukraine has to get it back, in my opinion. But again, Ukraine will decide for themselves, but Putin started this war for no reason, just because he wanted to. He fell in the trap of that little successful war, and he thought it will boost his rating or something, but there was no real reason for that. It's not like somebody trying to rob you on the street and wanted your watch. If you give your watch or your wallet, they will leave you alone. Russia wouldn't leave alone Ukraine. No matter they give them Crimea, they not give them Crimea, Russia wouldn't leave them alone. And Ukrainians not intend to do that. Like I just the other day met in the store Ukrainians who just arrived to Canada. They from western part of Ukraine. It's their opinion as well. They support Zelensky fully. They do not want to give up anything, and they know it's not gonna help. No matter what they give up, it's not gonna help. Putin will not stop killing them. And Putin doesn't even put on the table any propositions or declarations or anything like you do this, then it will be that. Nothing. All he wants is a temporary ceasefire so he can bring more troops and kill more Ukrainians and Russians at the same time. It's not something Ukraine can give him and he will say, okay, I'll stop now. I got what I wanted. He didn't want anything in the first place. Everything he named as a reason for the war was a pretext. It just was an excuse, nothing more. He didn't mean anything about NATO, and he proved that he isn't afraid of NATO. There was no any reasons for this war, unfortunately. It is useless waste of human lives. And until Putin in power, it's gonna continue, unfortunately. Why doesn't NATO get more assertive with Putin, seeing that he's probably too afraid of them to use the nukes? He knows that they are afraid of... Well, I don't think Putin gonna use nukes. I'm quite sure he might use the Zaporizhia nuclear plant. This is really important and scary. But nukes, I doubt. Why NATO isn't taking more serious stance? Russia has nukes, a lot of it, and they can use them. And NATO doesn't want a chance because Putin can use them. Nobody say he never will. Nobody knows what is in his mind. People thought he not gonna attack Ukraine. He did. For Putin, this war is equal his life. If he lose the war, big chance he will lose the power and he will lose his life. He is a cornered rat, and in this case, he might use nukes. He probably wouldn't, but nobody can guarantee that he wouldn't. That is why, otherwise, NATO would have been done with him long ago in the first days of the war. If Russia wouldn't have nukes, the war in Ukraine, even in 2014, wouldn't have happened. Well, it would have happened, but it would have been stopped immediately. Or at least, if they wouldn't, many people didn't know at the time what actually happening. And that's why I did my playlist about the war in Ukraine when it started. People in the West didn't know much, and part of it was massive propaganda and astroturfing campaign Putin did. He went up to the extent that from Russian budget, he paid members of several parties, ultra-right, ultra-left, like Nazi parties of different countries, to come to St. Petersburg, and they had a meeting there, and not just one. And it was public knowledge. I also posted information about it in some of my videos. He paid them to come to Russia, where Russians were taught them how to disrupt the life in their own countries. That's exactly what Prigozhin's trolls factories are doing. They interfere with elections, they posting whole bunch of comments everywhere. Only one Prigozhin's troll factory, I think it was like 15,000 people who just sitting, and plus bots, electronic bots who not even people, who creating whole bunch of information on the internet, and we run into them in Quora. That they are Russian trolls. The accounts are empty. They created after the full-scale invasion, and they keep pushing Putin's propaganda. And the same thing happening on Facebook, YouTube. I run into them in many places. So Putin lied so much about Crimea, trying to cover it up, and the whole stuff in Syria. He intentionally went to Syria just to distract the world from the war in Ukraine. And people kind of forgot about Crimea, about Ukraine, about Donbass, and started to run into Syria and see, oh, what's happening in Syria? It was a distraction, nothing more, for Putin. And yet Wagner was there, as well as it was in Ukraine, and Russia pretended, oh, it's not Russia. Now he proved it was Russia. And Russia has to be condemned for that. But with nukes, nobody can guarantee that he's not gonna use them. That is why NATO really trying to be careful about this. They trying to keep their hands clean. They're trying to stay away. They're trying not to do too much to provoke Russia. But Putin has nothing to respond with anymore. The only thing he can respond is nukes. And so far he didn't use any. So I wouldn't worry about that too much. I'm much more worried about Zaporizhia nuclear plant. But as soon as the attention of the world were attracted to this, it seems like he didn't dare to do anything in there for now. And it's not all that as scary if the plant would work in full capacity, which it isn't. It's just only one of the reactors still kind of working. But it's still dangerous, and he still can turn it into full capacity and make it happen, and then blame it on Ukraine, as he planned originally and as he planning now. This is kind of way more scary than Putin will nukes, actually. Zelensky was a good president. Well, I guess this question is more for Ukrainians. As far as I know, and I talked to a lot of Ukrainians, many of them pro-Russian. Well, were pro-Russian before the war. The Russian-speaking Ukrainians, many of them didn't even know Ukrainian language. before the war. Now many of them actually turned and voluntarily just giving up Russian language. They learn in Ukrainian and they just don't want to speak the language of aggressors by themselves. Nobody forcing them to. It's their personal choice. They talking to me in Russian because I don't know Ukrainian. I know enough to understand in general what it is about, but don't know enough to write on it or correspond or anything. Ukrainians, they had different opinions of Zelensky. Zelensky, they elected him because he was something kind of in between. There was hope that he will reduce corruption, but most of all, they were hoped that Zelensky will build the bridges with Russia, that Zelensky will stop the war in Donbass, which, as I explained them, it was useless to expect from Zelensky. But maybe Zelensky himself believed in it at the time. Before he became a president, he didn't know enough. Perhaps, I don't know for sure. It sounded like he was promising Ukrainians that he will mend defenses with Russia, which not gonna happen. Putin started this war on purpose. Putin and Russia invested a whole bunch of money to keep that conflict on Donbass going, to supporting those terrorists and bandits and Russian FSB officers like Girkin Strelkov, who grabbed the parts of Ukraine. And Putin was not going to give up Crimea, but at least they thought maybe in Donbass we can achieve something. I'm planning to make another video, like I now finished the videos about Crimea. I'm planning to make one video at least about Donbass. And I have a footage to show when two Grads standing kind of back to each other, and they shooting at the same time, Russians shooting at Ukraine and at Donbass people who is controlled by Russia, those so-called Donetsk People Republic, Lugansk People Republic, to show it in media that, oh, Ukraine shelled again Lugansk or Donetsk, which is, in fact, it's Russians doing themselves. Those separatists, so-called, which was a Russian army, the same Astra-Turfin campaign, the same hybrid occupation. Many of them were Russian citizens. Part of them were Wagner. Part of them were other regular Russian army. Part of them were FSB like Strelkov. They were shelling both sides just to show that, oh, look what Ukraine did. And they were supported by weapons, by money from Russia all these 8 years. Which Putin said, oh, where have you been 8 years? Putin was supporting it. Putin was financing it. Of course, he spent a lot of money to keep it going. So Putin wouldn't stop it because he didn't want to. He invested a lot of money to keep it going. Why would he stop this? And neither Zelensky nor anybody in the place of Zelensky could have made Putin stop. Unless they started the war, clear it up, which Ukraine didn't have enough ammunition, they didn't have enough weapons, they didn't have enough. They had old Soviet weapons, they did learn a lot during these 8 years thanks to United States and Canada and some other countries who taught them, who trained them. That is why they could withstand the initial attack in 2022. While the West was discussing, should we give them javelins, should we not, Ukraine defended itself. And Zelensky became a good war president. Would he be a good president after the war? I'm not sure. Many presidents who are good at war, not good at peace. Maybe he is both. But Ukrainians would decide it themselves, and some of them not pleased with Zelensky, and they might not vote for him after the war. But right now they're supporting him because he's doing what they think necessary. I think a little bit like a Gorbachev, who's popular abroad, but many Russians hate Gorbachev, and thinking he did so many bad things. They believe he destroyed USSR, which he didn't. On the contrary, he tried to preserve the USSR. But it's just misinformation. And so is for many Ukrainians, there are lots of misinformation. Russia was invested a lot of money to propaganda in Ukraine, especially for Russian-speaking people. And one of the parts of this propaganda is Russian Orthodox Church. Many priests are either from FSB or working for the FSB. And whatever they were saying to the people in the church, it was Russian propaganda, because Ukrainian Orthodox Church is a subject, a part of Russian Orthodox Church, and their leader was Russian Patriarch Kirill, which is former KGB officer Gundyaev. Everybody knows that he was Russian, the chief of Russian Orthodox Church, the leader, the Patriarch. He's former FSB officer. So is the previous Patriarch before him. Another question, a journalist on Quora said that Zelensky office signed off on removing mines from the entrance to the southern lands 2 weeks before the invasion. Yes, I did heard of that. I heard of that. That is some of Ukrainian people blame Zelensky for, who I know, but I didn't research this particular matter, and I don't know, first of all, is it true? And why, if it's true, why did it happen? I know for sure that Zelensky was warned that Russia might attack. And so is Ukrainian people, they knew. Many of them told me that we heard that Russia is planning to attack us in February, not know in February or when, but Ukrainians knew. They were warned, but nobody knew for sure. So Zelensky couldn't really act on it, and I can't understand why, because if Ukraine would start preparing and do massive stuff to prepare, Russia already trying to blame Ukraine. They said, oh, Ukraine was planning to attack us. Everybody saw at least 180,000 troops, Russian troops on the border with Ukraine. Nobody saw Ukrainian army standing on the border at all. So if Zelensky would have started massive preparing, Russia would be immediately in their propaganda twisting it as Ukraine gonna attack Russia, look what they're doing. And they probably wouldn't made anyway. At least by not scaring population, Ukrainian government probably thought maybe they won't attack. Maybe the United States will talk to Putin or something. And they did. They warned Putin. Putin didn't care. He decided to attack and he attacked. But if Ukraine would have done lots of preparations, probably it would have even looked worse for Ukraine, because look what they did. We just had to attack. They already saying that. Russians already saying that. It's not true, but they're saying that, oh, look what Ukraine did. We just had to attack them because that's what they did. And Ukraine did not attack anyone. And the proof is in the pudding. Russian flag in Crimea, not Ukrainian flag in Kursk or Belgorod or anywhere. It's not NATO flags. It's not flag of Canada in Russian territory. It's a Russian flag in Ukraine. Russia came to Ukraine, broke the Budapest Memorandum, broke a whole bunch of agreements, and grabbed Ukrainian territory. And organized a couple places in Donbass, like Donetsk and Lugansk Republic. Removing the mines, well, I am not sure it's true. I doubt that. That is why I wouldn't comment on this much, because I don't think they did it on purpose. And I did not see the real confirmation. People from whom I heard that were people brainwashed by Russian propaganda, and they were wrong about several things, not just one. So they just didn't know the truth, how it was. So I can't say I heard it from reliable source to discuss it, because I didn't. And I'm honestly saying that, like, I don't know is it true or not. And I don't have reliable sources which will confirm, yes, this is what happened and this is why. If I have time, I might look into it, but right now I'm very busy and unfortunately I can't research everything. So I don't think it's true, but again, I don't know for sure. The people, as I said, who I heard it from, they wasn't reliable source because they were on before. Several things I know for sure how it was. They wasn't right about that. Anyways, thank you for coming to my stream. I appreciate your patience with me, especially in the beginning when I didn't have enough. I couldn't make the sounds like Russian propaganda, though. They appear to have been traitors in the ranks at Kherson. again, yeah, for sure, I don't know. And there is a lot of Russian propaganda. Whatever sound kind of iffy, it most likely isn't true. How much support Poroshenko have these days? Poroshenko has some support. I don't know how much for sure because I don't think they're making polls right now. Poroshenko is, in my opinion, isn't as clear as Zelensky because Poroshenko was caught on corruption. But several people I talked to in Ukraine, which is again not many. I can't say it's not a poll. It's just a few people I know, which is again were pro-Russian in the past. Now they support fully Ukraine, but they think Poroshenko is a good guy, and he did actually show up himself as a good guy when the war started. He really supported Ukraine, but he might have corruption ties with Russia as well, but maybe he will be next president of Ukraine. It's up to Ukrainians to decide. I'm not Ukrainian. I don't know this part as well as I know other stuff. I researched the war in Ukraine. I researched Maidan. The rest, it's up to Ukrainians to decide who they want to vote. Poroshenko, Zelensky, someone else. Nobody can dictate Ukraine what to do. They will do it. The independent country, they will decide for themselves. Poroshenko, and again, the conversation I had about him was months ago. Right now, maybe the opinion changed about Poroshenko. It's hard to say. The situation changing in the war all the time, and situation about Poroshenko changing in Zelensky as well. But support for Zelensky is overwhelming. Different sources I saw, it was 90-something% people wanted to liberate the whole Ukraine. And they're right. Like, Putin not gonna stop. The more ground he has in Ukraine to put his troops, his weapons, his nuclear weapons, the worse it's for Ukraine. To me, the good thing for Russians is if Ukraine will liberate itself, it will mean Putin's complete and utter failure. Obvious and visible to everyone, which you can't present as a victory of any kind. So Putin will lose his power, one way or another. It's either there would be another coup, or Russian people would stand up, or something like that. It's good for Russia, because Putin is not good for Russia. That is also some trolls here in Quora was trying to say me. How dare you criticize Putin? Are you against Russia? Why do you hate Russia? I don't hate Russia. I hate Putin. And I hate imperial ambitions and people who support those imperial ambitions, who thinking it's okay to attack somebody else's country just because some little goblin in the Kremlin decided it's a good idea. And the worst thing what can happen to Russia was Putin. This Ukrainian journalist said it was in the papers. Well, many things is in the papers, it doesn't make it true. There are lots of propaganda. I spend a lot of time to decide, to find out what is true, what is not, what is propaganda, what is not, what is reliable sources, what is not. And the sources I provide in my videos or in description to the videos, usually almost every video has sources in the description or in a comment pinned to it. They are reliable sources. That's why I don't quote unreliable sources. Even I do look sometimes on some other sources, but nothing would coming from Russia, the country, official Russia, I consider reliable sources, even because there is no, media. There is no independent media left inside Russia, period. Like, anything would coming from Russian government or Russian media of any sort in Russia, it's not reliable at all, period. I seen it all in the USSR. I have lived in the USSR. That's exactly how it was done in USSR. All the media controlled by the government. Whatever they say, it's only approved by the government, and only government can tell them what to do, and they allowed to publish. That is why all independent media, which is again Russian, like TV Rain, like Popular Politics, and so on, they left Russia. They are reliable. They're not always right. Nobody always right. But they are reliable, but they're not inside Russia at all. Whatever is inside Russia, controlled by Russia, and any official media would be either closed like Novaya Gazeta or imprisoned. That's why all the media left. Ukraine, they have different sources. Depends on the source. It depends on the source and depends on the paper. Slow rolling weapons to Ukraine just cost innocent Ukrainian lives. Yet Biden still hasn't supplied the arms. Well, this is true. The slower we are, the more lives Ukrainians and Russians lost on the battlefield. It is very sad. It makes me very sad. But please remember that democracy doesn't work like a dictatorship. And so far, it's the best thing can happen to people. The only democratic countries live the best. It's not perfect, but it's the best we have. And in democratic countries, you have to make everybody agree. You can't really force them other people what to do. There would be people who disagree. You have to convince them. You can't just say, well, you have to do what I say or else. This is the difference between dictatorship and democracy. And I'd rather have imperfect democracy than perfect dictatorship, because it's way better. Putin can, like a flip of a coin. Today he said Prigozhin is a traitor. Tomorrow he said, it's okay, no big deal. Tsar decided otherwise. He made the law, he threw it in the garbage, and today it's not a law. Or if there is a law, but I think otherwise, and you don't follow this law because I say so. That's the difference between democracy and dictatorship. Democracy isn't perfect, but it's way better than dictatorship, unfortunately. Totally stand with Ukraine and be sure that Russia can never do this again. I absolutely agree with what you say. We must stand with Ukraine. We must support Ukraine. They need our support. They need our help. And the more we can help, the more likes, subscribes to channels like mine could help people to know the truth how it is, to go verify 5 or 7 sources themselves to find out that this is true and make their own informed opinion. My channel is informed opinion, but I share with you the facts. And if I'm not sure, I'm saying this is facts, this is my speculation, this is my opinion. And the facts I prove. The more people like, subscribe, share, the more people discuss it on Quora, the more people support that information to people in Russia. That's why I do my videos in Russian and in English. The more people support all of this, the more people know the truth, and the more information, true information people get. And that is why I provide the information, provide the sources, so people can come and verify. They not have to trust me on word. They just can come and verify for themselves. They could see what Putin said. They could see what Girkin Strelkov said. They could see what Zelensky said. They could see for themselves what happened. And make their own informed opinion. And then support Ukraine. I'm saying that people should support Ukraine. Because it's way, way bigger. No true Reagan Republican would support Trump because of the principle to isolationist and immoral Ukraine policy. I hope so. I agree with you, and I do believe that, as far as I know, any decent Republican or Democrat, they support Ukraine. Trump, I should make another video about several Putin's puppets and Putin's agents, and Trump is one of them. I'm sorry to say that, but this is true. I don't lie to Russians. I don't see why would I lie to Americans. And I'm not gonna find out, does he really believe in what he says about Russia, or he just corrupt, or anything. People who do bad things for their country is not friends of mine. And I have another post about Americans when I'm saying that I have seen all of this in USSR. And Americans unite. Stop looking at each other as members of one party, member of another party. One of the worst things Trump trying to do to his country is to split up people. Divide them. To be able to rule them. Unite. You're splitting up between and fighting between each other. They only make one person win, Putin. Putin just sitting, wonderful. Keep doing that, you Americans. And it just said that I'm Russian Canadian from the USSR fighting for the United States to make them, to keep them as good country as they already are. I visited 42 states and I met quite a few people. United States support Ukraine. And it doesn't matter Republicans or not. I should post another video soon. There was very interesting conversation between couple Republicans, actually high level, and really people who actually know what happened. One is I think he's Republican, former ambassador to Moscow, and they saying exactly the same thing what I do, because they know the truth. They actually know what happened. Everybody who actually know what happened, they agree with what I say, because I tell the truth how it is. German political and Western leaders like Obama who ignored Russian invasion of Crimea, emboldened and enabled Russian. True, and not just Obama. The first military engagement between Russian and Ukrainian armies, like official armies. Wagner also was Russian army, and Russian army was in Crimea, but they pretended they were not. But the first official engagement was Kerch Strait incident, and the president at the time was Mr. Trump in America. Trump did nothing about this. So everything he says about, oh, I would finish this war in 24 hours, and even Zelensky mentioned something like that, Obama would have finished in 5 minutes. None of it is relevant, none of it is true, because United States is not a part of this conflict. It's between Russia and Ukraine. And the United States was supposed to obey the memorandum, Budapest Memorandum, and they were supposed to help Ukraine back then. But as I explained in my whole series of videos about Crimea, in Ukraine, lots of stuff was happening. Many Ukrainian military betrayed Ukraine and went to the Russian side. Ukraine didn't have president at the time. Lots of stuff was happening. The world was confused, and Putin used a lot of propaganda, and so maybe some people who actually was good and tried to help, but they thought things will be otherwise. They didn't know enough at the time. That is why we need to spread the true information so people would be informed, so they can make the informed decision, support Ukraine, not support Ukraine, but they know the facts, how they are, not how some people presented it. It's not true. That is why I stand up against it, because people need to know the truth. How it is it good, is it bad? It doesn't matter. The truth is truth, and people should know that. Then they can make their own informed decision. Anyways, thank you very much for coming, and I'm glad you came. Next time I'll try to plan a little bit better streams to inform people a bit ahead. Unfortunately, it's not working out all that much, but I'll try. Thank you for coming, and I'm finishing for now, and thank you all for your attention. Please support Ukraine. Please support each other. Please support unity of your countries against Putin's propaganda. Decide for yourself what you can do with your countries. You are the citizens. You have the power. I proved it for myself in Canada. People have lots of rights, and they can use them to make life in their countries better. And it's up to you. Thank you very much. And yes, you're right. Poland and the Baltics, they informed. They were ignored because people wouldn't believe. Like, you understand that good people, it's hard for good people to believe and stuff like that, because they're good people. They don't lie themselves. They haven't lived in the situation I have lived. They haven't lived in the dictatorship. They lived in the democratic countries. So anyways, thank you for coming. See you later.